Welcome to the Push Ventures podcast, Push Your Advantage, and thanks a lot for tuning in. This is an installment of the Push Your Partner series of interviews. In this interview series, we're discussing various topics with different contributors to the African tech ecosystem. And today's guest is someone who's actually not in the African tech ecosystem, but still has something very valuable to add, Anushka Jain. She's studied economics and integrated marketing communications at Northwestern University, and she worked at Perot Jain, a Dallas-based family office, for 3 years. During this time, she worked on over 60 deals, including direct early-stage venture investments and fund investments across 4 different countries. Anushka was born and brought up in India, but is currently pursuing her MBA in finance at the Kellogg School of Management. She loves all kinds of adventure sports and is an avid Formula One fan. Together, we'll be speaking about family offices and their role in the venture capital space in general. We have 4 main topics to cover. One is family offices. What are they? Are they angels or VCs? Then important differences that family offices have to other investor types. How family offices approach expanding beyond their own comfort zone. And Anushka's experience working with a family office, and she will be sharing some specific examples with us here. Anushka, are you ready to be pushed?
For sure, Ben. I'm really excited to be here and thank you for having me.
Wonderful. So let's get started with our first topic. Family offices. Are they angels or VCs? Anushka, from your perspective, what's the motivation behind family offices investing into early stage startups, and how would you actually answer that question, angel or VC?
I would say there's a distinction to draw between a family office and an ultra high net worth individual who is investing in an angel deal. A lot of times when you see angel rounds, you will see an individual putting a little bit of money into somebody they may have met, versus you see a lot of family offices actually going into venture style deals with a team behind them who knows how to read these deals, who understands them, and will manage the deal for them. So I would say family offices fall more into the bucket of venture. Additionally, you will see that family offices, their favorite way of investing in this asset class, because it is a fairly risky asset class, is to go through other funds. So they may not invest directly in deals, at least to begin with. I think they would approach it more by investing in funds, feeling the scene out before doing direct deals. And a lot of times I've seen this in my personal experience when we invested in funds. We also had more conviction co investing alongside the funds directly into the deal later if we wanted to. A lot of funds would offer us sidecars, they would offer us co invest opportunities. And that was an approach we took, especially to industries or geographies that we were unfamiliar with.
So you would say that they use this as a risk minimization strategy?
Yes, I would say they do use it as a risk minimization strategy, especially if it's not. Some family offices are created solely for venture investing. Usually, those are much bigger families, or they have much deeper pockets and are able to have a team solely for venture investing. For the family offices that don't have that, this is typically how they would approach it.
And when it comes to specific industry preferences, are they typically based upon what family of the family behind the family office has experience with, or as you mentioned, in sometimes they're actually investing into uh, unknown industries to them at least. And after they have minimized the risk a bit, do you think a lot of them are very willing then to lead rounds as well?
For sure. So I would say it depends on each family. And I think that's very, as much as it depends on each fund, when you're looking at funds to invest in, new families are even more fickle because they don't have LPs who require them to nail down a thesis or an investment mandate and stick to it. So I would say it really depends on the family. But in my experience, and what I worked at was a strategic family office, there's been a rise in these. And what that means is they try and invest in startups that can work in some way with the family's core business or the family's core expertise. I'll give you an example. When I worked at Perot Jain, they had a large mobility and real estate practice. So we would look into deals where either the startup could work with our real estate team in some way, we could de risk our investment because we knew the industry extremely well. We could de risk our investment because one of the other Perot companies could be a customer for that startup. So I would say, while not all family offices look at it this way, there has been a rise in families realizing that, look, we know one industry really well. Say we made our money in hedge funds and banking, right? That means we know the finance industry extremely well. It's much more likely that we have the network to help a fintech startup succeed over a consumer brand. So there is that element of it to de risking it by investing in the industries they know. Having said that, not all family offices are like that. Some of them use this just as a small diversification tool. They are not looking at it as an innovation tool as well for their core businesses.
Okay, so they're basically a bit more flexible and have
Yeah.
that ability to really sometimes invest more in those industries they truly understand well and add that as a strategic element.
Yeah, and they're just more comfortable because venture is highly, very, very unlikely to be their full time job. This is something they're doing on the side. They're doing it for innovation, to preserve their capital. And they likely have an amazing team, but at the same time, it's probably not their focus area unless they're an extremely, like, they treat it like they're a fund.
Based upon your experience and those points we already discussed, how would you say that all these differences crystallize in a due diligence approach?
For sure. So I know you brought up leading downs before. In at least during my time, there were a few family offices I could think of that led rounds, but those were really large. They were set up almost like institutional funds. On the other side, family offices like ours took a slightly different approach to due diligence. Um, so the first thing about family offices is that yes, they are likely to have a team, but their team is probably managing a lot of different things for the family. They may be managing, charity. They may be managing like public markets, private investments, all kinds of things. So they're probably managing a mix of asset classes. When it comes to venture, especially early stage, diligence can look extremely different to what diligence can look like when you're looking at the public markets. So I would say their approach to it is probably a little bit different. They're probably coming in, you know, to close out a round or to co-invest alongside an institutional fund. They are probably coming in into an industry they know. Diligence for us would look a little bit like speaking. Suppose you were a real estate tech company coming in, we'd have you speak with one of the real estate experts on our panel. We would do market analysis because it was likely a seed series A deal. We would try and do all of the steps that funds do. However, we didn't have the team or the bandwidth to do it in the same manner that a fund leading a round would, and nor should we have. The economics of the fund wouldn't work out. But you may see slightly different diligence requests from family offices. I would say there are few family offices that are comfortable leading deals, at least at the given moment. And those are large. They're created with a very specific purpose. They're likely separated from the core family office, whose mandate is capital preservation. So, family offices are more likely to come in with a little check and close out a round. Having said that, family offices tend to they want to help you. They want to use the family's resources to help you a lot of the time. A lot of the families have someone who is an entrepreneur at some point. If you think about the Perot family, Ross Perot Sr. and Ross Perot Jr. were both entrepreneurs, and they really want to pay it forward. And that is something I've seen across the board. So even if a family office may come into you around with a smaller check, they want to help you, and they're coming in because they want to help you. So use that. If they do come into your round, do reach out to them with requests you have. A lot of times they can help you in ways that you don't even know yet.
So, with that help in mind, do they sometimes have a longer time frame before they expect returns on their investments? And do they also utilize their industry connections to provide mentorship or guidance, as well as sometimes in later rounds, assistance when it comes to financing or acquisitions, from your experience?
I think it really depends again, but in my experience, family offices are what I like to call patient capital. They, if you think about how they operate, they have only the family usually to answer to. And when you think about a family's mix of asset classes, Venture is unlikely to be extremely high up on the list as, like a large bucket of their asset allocation. Venture is likely to be a much smaller bucket of their asset allocation. Now, that means that they're probably not writing really large checks into startups and funds. However, they don't have a board of LPs to answer to. They have more flexibility with their investment horizons and return timelines. When the market is bad, they can be more stable a lot of the times, especially, and I've seen this in the case of, the company I worked at, a lot of the companies we worked with. If they're private companies, they are a lot less susceptible to market dynamics, especially when you're talking about the quantity of money they put into venture, right? It's usually a small amount of money for them. So they are not worried or don't need it back as quickly or aren't as affected by market dynamics in certain ways. So it can be a lot more stable, a lot more patient. I think with the industry connections and help, it really depends again on whether this is a family office who is used to doing this, whether it's a one off deal for them, and what their purpose behind them being created is. I know some family offices who've gone as far as placing orders for laptops for startups so they can get the discounted rate through the company, helping them find customers, helping redo their decks, sitting on their boards. Like, they've gone all out, and the kinds of resources they can provide you are truly amazing. But on the other hand, I know family offices who write a check and forget the company exists, and like 10 years later, when there's an exit or an acquisition, they're like, oh yeah, we did this. So it really just depends on what the structure is. I would say there has been a rise in kind of the strategic family office because people are seeing the value in it. And there's also been a rise, and I think this is something like UBS talks about in their yearly family report, a family office report. There's also been a rise in professionalizing family offices. And that, I think, as you see a rise in professionalization, you will see them being able to have the teams to vet venture deals thoroughly, be more comfortable putting their money into these kinds of deals, as well as seeing them create more structure around how they approach these deals. So, as there's a rise in professionalization, I think we're also going to see them come further into like a venture asset class.
All right. We typically, have those structured different topics, and the second one was the important differences to other investor types. But I feel like we've already touched upon that to some extent.
Yeah.
But now that you're mentioning, that they're coming in now and becoming more structured and focus more on the value that they actually bring to the table, how would you summarize it? What would those value items really be like that they bring to the table, which are very different to what VCs bring? I mean, apart from patient capital and knowing what it takes to build a business, what do you think is really that advantage that a family office can bring to a startup?
For sure. I think one of the things to think about is which family is investing in you, because I think that makes all the difference in the world. So when I was working with the Perots, the ability for me to help a real estate tech startup was 10x the ability for me to help a consumer brand, right? That is the industry that their core companies operated in, and that is the industry we could help in. Now, that's not to say we didn't do investments where we weren't as helpful as we could have been in real estate, but it just depends on each deal and it just depends on each family. There may be another family who can help, like the consumer brand, and help them build it out. I know another family in India who can do that really well. So it just depends on which family invests in you. And I think that's why, again, it's super important to pick the right investors. As much as you say that for funds, it applies even more to families. So it depends on how much really they're able to help you in each scenario. Having said that, I think families provide a diversification of capital pools, right? Like you see when SVB goes down, venture market is doing really bad, there's a general sense of panic, and that doesn't tend to happen. The second thing is a lot of them have really deep pockets. And if you are working with their core businesses in some way, if you are, providing them value and they see that value, they may be able to keep following on. And that's something that we were able to do at Perot Jain. I think there was a company that we incubated out of, you know, we incubated out of one of the real estate developments. We worked with them, and we worked with them for almost, I would say, like 7 or 8 years, invested, followed on through the Series B from angel capital. So it really depends. And a lot of them may have that ability to follow on if you do build that relationship. I also think family offices are investing in funds that are probably investing in you anyway. So this works out really well for the family office if they can start directly investing in you and you have more of that interface with them. So I think those are a couple of the things that family offices bring to the table. The other thing is we're also in a market where capital is becoming harder and harder to come by. And a large pool of capital, which is often not as visible to everybody, is family offices. So it's just an extremely large untapped pool of capital sometimes. Because you see the funds everywhere, you see public market investors, you see banks, you see all of these different pools of capital. But family offices, by design, are usually much more hidden. So it's just another pool of capital that you can gain access to.
And according to you, also a very flexible pool of capital,
Very
because if you
flexible, very
establish a
patient.
very good relationship with them, right, they're happy
Yeah.
to add money to it because they believe in it. And it's the long-term view that they bring then, I suppose.
And they also you see family offices have different themes along which they invest. So like this year, the top three investment themes for family offices are digital transformation, medical devices and health tech, and automation and robotics. That like the UBS report says this is technically for private equity, but I think this could really leak down to venture as well as investment themes.
And when it comes to those themes, or even at times mandates, they're typically called mandates in the fund world, right? You've already hinted at it earlier that family offices are much more flexible on their mandate. From your experience, how flexible would you actually say they are? Have you seen um, the family office you've spent your time with, Perot Jain, invest in something that they were, let's say, truly beginners in, just because they wanted to learn at times? Or how would you describe it?
I would say it depends on their long term strategy, but yes. So, family offices, when I say flexibility, they are not tied down by what their thesis is, and they're not tied down to it for 10 years, right? You think of a fund, when they start fundraising, they're like, this is our thesis, this is what we're investing in, and that is what people give them money based on. For family offices, they can start something, they can decide that, hey, this is really not working and we want to completely pivot our strategy. And they have the ability to do that because it's just them deciding what their strategy is. So the flexibility comes in many ways. And I think what's really interesting is that they're able to respond to market dynamics a little bit better sometimes because they're not tied down to a sector or a stage that they need to be investing in. Flexibility can also come in the form of maybe not having strict, ownership requirements that they need to take in. They, like, suppose you only have $50,000 left in a deal, they may have wanted to put in 150, but there's only 50. They're able to make that work. Whereas fund dynamics often don't let funds do that. Sorry about that.
Bless you.
Funds often don't have that flexibility or may not be able to invest in a deal because it's slightly over, the valuation they would have liked. It's not the right stage. They aren't meeting their ownership targets. Family offices tend not to have to worry about those things. Having said, we approached learning new industries by investing in funds. That was our go-to method. And we decided that, look, we don't have the team and the bandwidth to completely go in, put lots of money behind it, and diligence a completely new industry, a completely new geography. We're going to let a fund do that for us because fees are a much more economical way to learn about a new industry. But we are going to be on top of the fund. We're going to learn about, we're going to learn about each of the deals that the fund does. We're not just going to give them the money and forget it. We're going to negotiate co-investment rights, right? So that was our method of going into new industries and learning about it. There are families that would do direct deals as a method of learning, but I would say typically it's funds, and flexibility really is in the form of not being they don't have to miss a deal because of all of these other factors that a traditional fund may have to miss a deal because of. If they like the company, oftentimes they can make it work.
Okay. And you've hinted at all these different extra advantages that can come with a family office. Would you say that the maintenance and the building of the relationship with the family office is truly the factor that can set an entrepreneur apart, which will allow him to tap more into those advantages that a family office can bring?
I would think so. I would say, like, families in general, when they're investing, right? Like, a fund looks at it a little bit more objectively in certain cases, and family offices may as well. They may have a team that, really truly operates like a fund. But oftentimes, if you can convince the family that this is something you really want to do and the team can check it out, it's something they can make work. And building a relationship with them is extremely important for two reasons. A, of course, to get the capital, if you know them, if you can work with them and convince with them that this is something they should be investing in and tell them a true story of why they should be, then yes, that's really important. But B, I think having a relationship with some of these families is greatly beneficial for the entrepreneur. As I mentioned, a lot of them are entrepreneurs. They know what it takes to build a business. They know they've been in that entrepreneur's shoes likely at some point. It may not be that person in the family, but somebody in the family has. And I think there's just a lot of value they can give entrepreneurs and a lot of value they can give them in terms of mentoring, in terms of getting to know them. Even if it's a family office or a family with a business that isn't investing right now, a lot of times they may know the answer to certain questions that you may not find otherwise, right? They are successful operators. And I think that adds a lot of value, especially if you can get capital with them. That combination, I think, is extremely valuable to entrepreneurs. Use them as mentors, use them to guide you. There's a lot you can learn from them. I know I did.
That's great to hear. So now let's consider, I mean, you yourself, you're from India, and I'm sitting here in Africa.
Yeah.
Both are, if you're looking at the continent and the subcontinent, both are very complex regions, I'd say, to operate in. When you're thinking about family offices approaching such a region, a lot of times markets like India or the different markets within Africa are beyond their comfort zone. And a lot of people feel a special sense of uncertainty
Yeah.
with those markets for good reason as well, oftentimes. But then at the same time, there's also plenty of opportunity in both of these regions. How would you say, or what would you say are those factors that motivate family offices, which in particular, as you've said already, are primarily focused on capital conservation, right? And
Yeah.
risk minimization, which they do with so many different strategies. How and what would motivate them to really spread their wings to consider geographical expansions to markets such as India or the different markets of Africa in particular for our case?
For sure. So here's the good news for startups all over the world or companies all over the world. UBS is predicting the biggest change in geographical preferences for family offices in the coming years, right? That family offices have historically had a bulk of their capital in North America, and they're changing. They're moving their capital out, they're diversifying their capital in different places. And when you think about where the market is today, that makes sense, right? Diversification is the key to having capital conservation in the long term. I think there's also a lot of value in investing in startups in the North America and Africa for a couple of reasons. First, there is that ability to see a successful startup in the US and invest in a local version of it that is changed towards local dynamics. So this is something that's slightly less risky for investors because they know that, hey, this idea has worked before, the tech is likely already built out. How can we place this and change it and back a local company who does that? Second, there is just a big valuation arbitrage. And that is something that we worked on very closely when we were investing outside of the US. Valuations are likely much more reasonable in Africa and India than they are in the US. And with the way global markets are today, There's no reason a startup that's founded in India or a startup that's founded in Africa cannot become global and take advantage of a much larger market than just the country they're formed in. So I think even just financially, it makes sense to diversify your portfolio beyond America at this point. So that is the first thing. The second thing is a lot of family offices, especially with early stage venture, want to do this because they have some other motivation. It could be that the family really wants to work and back, young women entrepreneurs in Africa working in health tech, right? There may be another component to why they want to do that. And a lot of it, I think, is also, it may not be the same way as a foundation donates money, but there may be a social reason behind why they want to invest this money in certain places. And I think health tech or fields like that usually draw some of that money as well. When I was looking at new geographies to invest in, one of the geographies that came up that we started investing in was Estonia. And we just thought they had fantastic technology. The government was extremely helpful, extremely supportive of startups. They had a really unique venture ecosystem. And I think that was what really drew us there. And families recognize that a lot of family members are very clued in and really know what's happening throughout the world. They need to know that for their core businesses a lot of the time. And they have an understanding that I think a lot of people miss out on. So it makes sense for them financially to diversify their portfolio. And that's a market trend we're seeing across all asset classes for them. So there's no reason not to see it in venture. And B, I think there might be other reasons as to why they want to invest internationally. Maybe in our case, we did a lot of work with India because one of the partners had grown up in India, had amazing connections. We would see really great deals. And that once you get into the ecosystem, you learn and learn and learn and keep doing more deals. So I would say it really depends on the family again, but it financially makes sense and it may make sense for other personal reasons, which is coming back to it. Personal reasons can play a role in why family offices give you money.
Okay, and we've already spoken a lot about those different risk minimization techniques, but when it comes to such markets and in, let's say, the family office doesn't have a background in Africa, for example, like in your case, it was India, there was some background, so there was some familiarity with the region. How do you believe you go about it from your experience as well with Estonia, for example? How did you go about it in the sense of how do you make sure that you scan your partners the right way? And at the same time, also, if you were now maybe an entrepreneur, what advice would you give them how they should approach a family office? Should they just send that cold email, which lands in the inbox? Here's a PDF, here's my startup, I'm going to change the world. Or should they approach you via LinkedIn? Should they just give you a phone call? What do you feel from your experience would probably be the right way to approach a family office, particularly when you're, speaking to maybe the typical family office in the States and you're sitting here in Nairobi, Kenya, or in Bangalore, India?
Yeah. So, funnily enough, a lot of family offices by design do not have an email or a phone number for you to reach out to. So, that's usually not even an option to begin with. And I would say that's probably not the right option either. Some family offices that are more public, that operate more like funds, will have the same sort of way of reaching out as you would to a regular fund. I know Perot Jain had methods of reaching out, whether they were LinkedIn or emails, that were similar to regular funds. However, when you look at the deals we actually invested in, either they came from the family's network itself, so somebody they knew showed it to us, or a lot of times, and I think this is one of the much more underutilized ways of reaching out to family offices, we would have a fund that we invested in email us saying, hey, we have this portfolio company that we think could be a great fit for the Pirogen platform. And this is why. Would you be interested in a connection? So, for startups that are looking for family offices to invest in them, look at who's already invested in you and research the families. Have a very research list of families that you would like to target, right? Say, hey, I'm really looking for a family office that can help me with XYZ or who may have a background in XYZ, because that's a great place to start. and have a value proposition for why they should invest in you. You likely already have that. Just edit it to why they should invest in you, and that may make it a lot easier for them to see why they should invest in you, as opposed to just see the email and pass it on. But go to your current investors already. Say don't say who are your LPs who may be able to help me with this, who may be able to help me close out this round. That can be a great starting place. None of their LPs may invest in you, but they may know people who will. So that is usually, I would say, my strategy for contacting family offices. It is not the easiest. I recognize that a lot of them are hidden by design, but once you do get in, make sure you have a very valid reason as to why they should help you. And especially if you're able to research the family and understand their backgrounds, that may really go a long way for you.
So, as always in life, come prepared, correct?
Come prepared, but also I would say try and utilize the LP base of the current funds you have. Don't just start emailing the fund saying, hey, I want like money from all your LPs, but have a more targeted approach. I think a lot of funds also do throw events where their LPs meet all of the startups and use those events, I think, as a way to get to know the LPs better, which I think a lot of startups miss out on doing.
Okay, wonderful. Now, the last part that I, as well as I think the listeners of the podcast, want to know about is your experience in your family office. You've already given a bit of hints here and there about your experience with Perot Jain. And what I'd like to know in particular when it comes to now Estonia. Now, how did you actually go about it? How did, first of all, the expansion come up? What triggered that need or want to actually go into Estonia? Growing up in Europe, I can understand it, but I know, in America, people are sometimes a bit further away from Europe. So was that like research or meetings? And then what really brought about that decision to expand? So where came sort of the idea spark towards the decision, yes, let's do it? Walk me a bit through that.
For sure. So, the families I worked for had a very global mindset. And you could see that in the way they had both done business, right? The Perot family had, worked closely in the Middle East. They had worked in Europe. Their real estate development firm had, developments all over the world. And with Anushka Jain, who was the other partner, he had a background working in India, scaling businesses where there were offices across the world. So they knew what it took to do business in other places, and they were comfortable doing business in other places. I think that was a key point to being able to expand globally. When I joined the family office, they had a partner who they worked with in Israel that we would do some investing with, and they had a couple of investments in India. But I think Estonia, it's actually pretty funny. One of the partners was there briefly for like a layover or some kind of like a flight situation. And they were walking around and they just noticed all of these like small high tech things or this really interesting energy in Tallinn. And my first actual assignment as an analyst at the fund was to figure out Estonia. So the idea was figure out what is going on there, just like look into it. As I started looking, I spoke to funds, I did some research, I created a deck. I was like, this looks extremely interesting. So I would say it took us about a year from when we started looking into it to actually making an investment. But what we did was we joined their VC association and just spent some time learning. And through that, we found an amazing fund, Terra Ventures, that we partnered with. We invested money into them. Then we visited Estonia. This was all during COVID, so our ability to actually go there was a little bit hampered. It was all done over Zoom. I don't think we would have written a check to an Estonian fund without going there had it not been COVID. Um, we visited Estonia for one of their biggest startup conferences, and that's how we started to get comfortable in the ecosystem. It really was just putting in the legwork and also, frankly, a little bit of faith and a little bit of risk. We decided to put a small amount of money in, but really it was research. It was an idea that was sparked by just one of the partners saying, hey, I think this may be interesting. And we didn't think it would grow into what it did when we initially started looking into it. And then it was just being a little bit patient, learning about the ecosystem, and just putting in the legwork for us to feel comfortable with it. In the end, we even had the Perot companies had the Estonian president visit, and their relationship with Estonia has grown beyond just like kind of the initial capital that we started with. We have startups from Estonia now operating in Texas, and we're trying to create a bridge, and we were trying to create a bridge that way. So I think there was a lot of interesting things that the Perot Jain team was doing, and a lot of it just started with a random spark of an idea. So that I know is something that's not the greatest to hear because there's nothing you can control about it or create that moment. But it really just started from there. But what was amazing was once they had that idea, they had all of these resources to make it happen and keep growing it beyond what we'd initially thought it was going to be. So
I
that was
think
what was really great about it.
I think I like hearing about it, despite there not being that one moment that you're hinting at. First of all, I like the idea again. You can see that kind of very conservative mindset, dipping your toes in first before the foot, and then maybe you go into the water until your knees, and then you see before you start swimming, right?
Yeah.
And when I went to Thailand myself, so I actually can totally relate to that experience. It's a very interesting place, a very interesting country. It's very small, so likely we've met some of the same people there. But it's a beautiful place, as well as a very like the people are very entrepreneurial as well, which I like.
And it's extremely entrepreneurial, and the government has some amazing initiatives that they use to back entrepreneurs. I've never seen that level of just complete support from all agencies.
Yeah, they had this typical, we're a very small country. We don't have that many people. The more people that work in government, the more we're actually eating from our own cake that we have to kind of create. So they figured out the best way to make it really happen at a very low cost. And
Yeah,
it's truly fascinating. I also felt like what they brought to the table and what they've created is just something very different. You don't see that everywhere.
I completely agree.
Um, One thing I'd like to know, especially sitting in Africa here as Push, always looking for interesting partnerships, always having had to like collaborate with people from Mauritius as well before, and happy to work with people from South Africa because we all also value the collaboration and partnerships. I'm sure that because you already hinted at it, that family office, like the Perot Jain that you were with, approach it the same way. But how did you actually select your partners? So, what was important for the family when they looked at, let's say, 5 different potential partners? What brought it down to that one fund that you started to dip your toes in with?
I would say so. We invested in super early stage venture, right? Think seed, Series A. At that point, whether you're a fund or a family office or an angel investor, it's a little bit of faith. I'm going to be very honest. You don't usually have a performance track record to the same level as you do in, a private equity fund. You may not have the ability to do a lot of that. I would say one of the things was just looking at the background of the person we were backing. It was very important that they liked the background. And I know there's this image of like startup founders being a 20 something that you're putting money behind, but we really looked a lot at a lot of the founders we invested in or funds we invested in were people who were older, who had had a track record of excellence, who had had a track record of you know, managing funds or managing capital in different ways. We also did a lot of investing, and I think this is something the Perot family is amazing at, is supporting veterans and supporting people who come out of that ecosystem, and they usually have amazing leadership skills, and we did a lot of defense investing as well alongside them. So really just looking at the right people and finding trustworthy people we can get comfortable with, people with a track record of excellence, people who've done this before. I would say we invested in very few first time fund managers or first time. They may have been a first time CEO, but they had a track record of working, in really high pressure roles. So that was a lot of it. I would say, second, again, for us, it was the industries we knew, and we knew that, look, hey, we can help out in this industry if we're looking at a startup. But with funds, it really just depended on getting reference checks. Who else is investing in this? How can we get comfortable with this? And a lot of times the answer was no. If there just wasn't a way for us to get comfortable with it, we would not do it. And they may have been great investments, but if there was some reason that either of the partners felt like they could not get comfortable with it, we wouldn't do it. But again, just depends on the person building that relationship. There were times when we'd build a relationship over a year or two and then eventually invest. We may not have invested in that round, but we may come in much later as well, because it may have taken us that year to get comfortable with the person and see their track record.
Wonderful. Makes sense as well. Very conservative. I like it.
Very conservative, which I know is like conservative and venture capital don't really go together, but I think we found a happy medium, and I think that's where family offices are going to remain. I don't think they're going to go all out, venture style, like full beans fund investing.
I actually disagree with that. I think it does go very well together. I think over the last 10 years, maybe it didn't go so well
Yeah,
together, but in general, it does. And if you're looking at the first kind of venture capitalists as well in the States who started that whole Silicon Valley buzz, a lot of them were very, at the core, very conservative value investors. And I think that's something which is also needed over the next 5 to 10 years.
I agree.
Because
I started working in venture in 2020, so I've really only seen the crazy markets. I've not seen a stable venture market yet.
yeah, it's going to be, I think it's going to be interesting as we readjust to that.
Yeah.
Maybe one last question. Can you give us an example of how you connected one of the Estonian startups to, the family core companies and what value was created by that connection?
Of course. So we had a number of really interesting situations, but one was we had a company that did kind of, how you have the white stripes on roads? So we had a
Yeah.
company that had a little robot that would do that. And we invested in an Estonian fund called Terra Ventures, and they were leading the round for this company. So we came alongside them and put a small check in because we were like, hey, we have lots of roads and parking lots here in Texas. Like everybody in Texas has lots of cars. So, great business idea for us here. Slowly over time, it took about a year for the company to develop a prototype that they were comfortable bringing over. And I worked very closely with the fund in Estonia as well as the company over time. We then connected them to the Perot's real estate company, Hillwood, and Hillwood worked with them to bring them over. So, having their robot shipped to the United States, the team flew over. We found them a parking lot they could do a demo with. We connected them with other investors here and had a little showcase for them. So, they had, they could demo their product in the US. They could have US investors come in. They could have US industry partners come in. They could show the Hillwood executives, how this could potentially help them in the future because labor is a huge issue now. And sitting there and painting stripes is not the kind of labor people want to be doing anymore. So it's great if that's, a task that can be automated as well. So we had them come here, we had them get a little bit more involved in the US ecosystem because one of the things we learned very early on is countries like Portugal or Estonia or Israel, all of their startups have to have a very global mindset from the beginning because Estonia is a very small country, like you said, and they can't sustain just having customers from there. So a lot of them really are looking at the US market as a place for expansion. So we wanted to serve as the bridge that could help them find the resources they needed in the US because it's not easy to do, just to come here and figure out what's going on. So we could give them a physical place to stay. We could give them industry connections. We could give them all of these things that made their lives in the US much easier and help them kind of see if they could open up those market opportunities in the US.
I think that's a great example. Thank you very much for that. And I'm sure that there is a parking lot in Texas somewhere now with a whole lot of white stripes on it.
This Texas is like full of parking lots. Did not expect that when I moved there.
Well, but they like the cars, right?
Love their cars and love their trucks.
Wonderful. Anushka, thank you so much for this interview.
Thank you.
What I'll try and do now is I'll try to summarize our talking points a little. I'd say what I've really had as takeaways is the one is family offices really work a lot with risk minimization. They do so with co-investing and ideally focusing on industries they already know well because that's also where they can add most value. And they usually want to invest to help the companies and are very patient. when it comes to the value that they bring, it typically depends on the background of the family and what is the core of the family, the background that they kind of created their own wealth with, because that's also where they have most of the connections and know-how. And then that long-term perspective that they bring to the table, as well as the ability to do follow-up investments. But when it comes to follow-up investments and wanting to plug into that capital, the relationship with a family office is extremely important. That needs to be maintained. And a lot of times when a family office is considering new industries or even new geographies, it's always that new industry and new fund first. So first we're going into a new fund that we're seeing rather than going directly into a startup. And I think the same route is the one that you described in your example, in which the Perot Jain went in to a fund first in Estonia and then co-invested with the fund. And when it comes to the geography, I think the biggest change for family offices, as you said, which will come according to the UBS report, will be that geographic change. One, for diversification, but also for valuation arbitrage. And oftentimes as well, the reasoning behind it is specific motivations, such as you mentioned, I think, women businesses or social reasons. And sometimes even the ability to connect the existing investors, right? Or have existing investors connect you for specific needs is the best way into an introduction to a family office. So going to a fund and saying, hey, this is really what I need. This is really what I need help with. Can you help? And then oftentimes they will introduce family offices because you mentioned you might have had an internal email, but you don't publish it outside. Anything to add from your perspective? Did I forget anything very important? Please.
No, Ben, that all sounds amazing. And again, I said this a lot, but with family offices, it just depends on each family, which I know is not the answer everyone wants to hear.
But it's okay. I think it's pretty much the same with funds. It always depends on the people behind the operation who make the decisions in the end, right? All right.
Yeah.
And thank you so much for being here. And for all the listeners out there, you can find Push on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook as Push Venture Capital, and on Twitter, which is now called X for some reason, as on the hashtag #PushYourAdvantage. And we'll be back next month with another podcast on the African tech ecosystem, which is available on Spotify, Apple Music, AfriPods, and of course on YouTube.